excited we finally get to chat. It's
I,
great.
I know, I know. So, my first question for you is, what was your motivation to get into sports, and why specifically the equality and diversity area?
So it was a bit strange, really. So I was born in Brighton, and when I started high school, we moved up to mid Wales to a super remote, like right on the beachfront. It's an incredible place to live, but it's pretty much the most remote place to get to because however you get there, you've got to go over the mountains. So it's like right in the middle, right on the coast, which is incredible. But it means there's not a huge amount of stuff to do if you're not like kind of outdoorsy, which did grow on me. But I wasn't hugely sporty when I lived in Brighton, and when I moved, I kind of got into sport a bit more at school, and then I found the local village hockey club and got involved there. And then I'm one of those people that can't just like turn up and do something. Like I have to get involved with other stuff. Like, so I then started doing a bit of umpiring, a bit of volunteering, and hockey kind of grew from there. Ultimately, it meant that I went to uni at Loughborough, which was an amazing experience for me. And that meant that I was kind of surrounded by that sport atmosphere, and it kind of pushed things on a bit, and I was able to get involved in bits. And then, so kind of growing up as a gay man and being open about that from being at high school and having a great positive experience with it, as well as through school and through playing sport, I've always kind of volunteered or had an interest in that kind of a LGBT plus inclusion space. So I've done quite a lot of work in that. I still do now, both in my day job and volunteering. But that really was kind of where it started, and that kind of passion for equality, diversity, inclusion all kind of grew from that space, really.
Okay. So what are some of the like volunteering activities that you participate in, like outside your day job?
Yeah, so I mean, I say this, so I say I have like a day job and then gay jobs, like because I have loads of like volunteer things.
The random, so it's fine.
Yeah. So at the moment, I'm on the board for the Federation of Gay Games, and I chair their Diversity and Inclusion Committee. So for those that maybe don't know, the Gay Games is a federation of kind of member organisations around the world, but it culminates every 4 years in the running of a mass participation event. So it's kind of like an LGBT plus inclusive Olympics, right? So the last one was in Paris in 2018, which was my first games, but there was something like 10,000 athletes. It took over the whole city. It has like an economic impact of €1 billion. Like it's a major event. So the next one is in Hong Kong in 2 years, or is hoping to be in Hong Kong. And then we are bidding process for the next one. So that's quite a lot of work with that. But we've got a really good chance with that Diversity and Inclusion Committee to really keep driving that inclusion space for the global LGBT plus community, which is really exciting. I kind of got there through doing lots of smaller or kind of more regional based LGBT plus organisation volunteering stuff in this country. But then more recently, I think I can say, I've just been asked to join the Black Swimming Association Advisory Group Board, which I'm really excited about, because I used to work for the swimming governing body for 4 years before I worked at Sport England. And it's a really important time, obviously, with everything kind of linked to Black Lives Matter, and especially with swimming, with all of these kind of weird rumours that exist around how and why Black people can't swim and things like that. So the organisation has made some really good momentum with partners, and I'm really excited to get involved in that, and just kind of lots of other bits and bobs, but that's kind of what I'm doing at the moment, to give you a bit of an idea.
When does that start, your involvement with the board?
So with the Black Swimming Association, we have our first advisory board meeting on Friday, actually. So officially it will start from then. Yeah.
And then do you have like a lot of or do you think there are lots of university students that take part in the Olympics, the ones that you just spoke about?
Like the gay games?
Yeah.
No, so we really struggle with that kind of probably 18 to 25-year-old age group. So students or recently graduated. And I think that's, I mean, so the cost is probably one thing. I think probably because a lot of those university students are just having a great time and living their best lives at uni anyway, so maybe not looking at stuff outside of that. And then once you're recently out of uni, you're trying to get on the work ladder or get settled somewhere. So a lot of it stems from where there are lots of LGBT sports clubs across the country. So people will tend to be involved with that and then go on to these bigger events. So whether or not people participate in those clubs locally, or they feel they do need to or not, one of the things we're trying to do with my day job is so we fund Pride Sports, who support us with our LGBT plus work. And they have an LGBT sport club finder on their website, so people can go on and track where there might be some local opportunities to them. And we're trying to build that all the time. And we're trying to overlay that with different information at the moment. So those clubs that are more disability friendly, we're adding filters onto that. So we're continuing to add more and more information all the time.
Okay. I'm just wondering, like, is there a way we can change that? Because we do have an LGBT plus society at our university, but I'm not quite sure how many of them are aware of stuff that happen, in different areas, and how many of them are actually involved in sports. So I think, looking into how we can support them, or how they get to know about things that happen across the board, because I think it's all information spreading. Sometimes people have no clue what's going on, or like you said, university is just full on and they're there to just have the time of their life. So what are some of the projects you're working on? Obviously, in light of COVID, things may have changed for you rapidly, but what are some of the projects for you specifically that you are championing?
So Sport England, I lead on our LGBT plus and ethnic minority participation work. So, since March, it's just been a bit mad with kind of parameters changing all the time. But so generally, across all of our work areas, we tend to invest in kind of partner organisations to help us achieve what we want to achieve in these spaces. So I've already mentioned Pride Sports. We also fund Gendered Intelligence, who's supporting us with providing trans inclusion training to the sector. Across kind of the ethnic minority space, our main partner there is Sporting Equals, who have been around for a long time and are kind of changing their role a little bit at the moment. But the way that we've kind of reacted to the COVID situation, everything that's led to, has meant that we've been able to work with a much wider range of partners to achieve a lot more. So when COVID first hit, we released a community emergency fund, which was about supporting the sport physical activity sector to kind of stay afloat as much as possible. And the plan originally was hopefully that they could all come back and be ready to go again in September time. Obviously, a bit of that did happen, but we're now facing second lockdown. But one of the things that led to was us then establishing kind of a secondary fund, which was our Tackling Inequalities Fund. So that was set up as a way for us to get support directly to those who were being hit hardest by the virus. So that was ethnic minorities, low social economic groups. So those people who are the most less affluent. That's terrible English, but you know what I mean.
Disadvantaged,
yeah. Disadvantaged and long-term health conditions.
Okay.
So through that funding, we either we've massively grown the number of partners we're working with in that space. Some have had funding from us to then distribute across their own communities further, or some have had funding from us to be able to run their own projects. So every county in the UK or across England rather has an active partnership. So in the first phase of that funding, all of the active partnerships got some funding to go out and work more directly with those audiences, which is going really well. And then in the second phase, we were investing in other kind of national partners, so whether they were national governing bodies of sport, more local organisations, kind of other community-based organisations that we may not have worked with before. So a lot of that funding is out there now and is really having an impact at a local level, and that's everything from kind of distributing home workout kit at food banks where we can support people to what are some of the other projects we've seen? Kind of a huge range of different local level projects to really help people who need that support the most.
Yeah. At a local level, do you think there might be people who are interested but don't know about it? And if that's if that's the case, is it up to them to go on to search, or is it by contacting their local councillors? I'm just worried that obviously there are all these funds available and distribution going on, but some of the people that also need it don't know where to go, don't know where to start from.
Yeah, I mean, that's always a struggle with our funding, in that it's difficult for us to reach the real kind of hyper local level. And also I think if people do hear about funding from Sport England, they may be thinking, that's not for me, it might be too much work, it's going to be too hard to get that funding, and we're really aware of that stuff. But throughout all of the emergency funding and the Tackling Inequalities funding, it's the most relaxed we've ever been around kind of checks with governance or even the links with sport and physical activity, because we're trying to be as relaxed as possible with that, just to make sure that we're getting some support out there. Bristol is actually a really good example of where there's some amazing project work going on. So Westport is the active partnership who have been really hot on this from the very start. They are one of the few active partnerships that has a black chief exec, which I think helps, because it's meant that Steve has been able to be much more switched on, I think, to what the community needs are, and has been able to direct support that way. We've also just invested a large amount into Vosca, who you may have heard of, who are kind of a community support organisation across the city of Bristol and wider area. And they are working with the Black South West network as well to try and reach communities. So they're a really good example of where a lot of these kind of influential community-based organisations are all partnering up around this work. So Bristol, I think, is going to be a really great example of where others can learn from how to build partnership and reach people.
Is there usually like a feedback process on how these local organizations let you know how the funding has been used, and obviously using them as an example of best practice for other cities?
Yeah, so I mean, again, we're being pretty fairly relaxed on the learning side of things, because we don't want to ask for too much, because it's just become too much work. But we'll certainly be touching base in terms of seeing how it's all going. A lot of Vosca's plan actually is to kind of front load the community support, so that they are spending a lot of the investment has been about supporting organisations to be able to get hold of funds, which sounds a bit strange. But what we know is that kind of securing the fund process is the trickiest bit. So they're going to spend a lot of time helping organisations putting together kind of strong bids and plans and ideas about what they can do with the work, and then further distributing it, linked with the other partners as well. So we'll learn from the distribution of that money in terms of where it's gone and what it's achieving, and all the different kinds of project work that's being delivered. But that will all emerge over kind of the next 6 months or so, which will be really fascinating.
Okay. It was Black History Month last month.
It was, yeah.
I feel like that flew by, especially because at UWE, we had a longer welcome period where we wanted to ensure that, our students transitioned quite smoothly. So whereas other universities started early on, we started on later, and we had a 3-week window. So October went by quickly.
Yeah.
So are there any specific things that you did for Black History Month? And, you know, I think it's not about Black History Month specifically. It's having the conversation all year round, which is something that we decided to do at the SU, you know, stretching out all the events and activities. Yeah, so we called it, our campaign is called Celebrating Black Excellence, because, you know, traditionally we found that students start on during the year, and as they're still trying to figure out what university is, there are loads of stuff that happen and they miss out on it. So yeah, we thought about doing it all year round rather than just keeping it to that month. So for you, was there anything specific that you were looking into that took up your time?
Yeah, I mean, so we did put out a fair amount of comms across the month. So we actually have an internal staff network called the Culture Crew, which is where our kind of ethnically diverse staff, that's the main focus of that network. We have a few different staff networks which all link in with each other. But they led a lot of the external comms around this, and kind of showcasing individuals and sharing the other good work that was happening across sport. But I mean, this whole conversation has been a big piece of work for us since, well, on a more ongoing basis, but has certainly, obviously, because of Black Lives Matter, it certainly moved things up the agenda and put a lot more pace behind the work that we were doing, rightly so. So that very quickly led to a much wider conversation around race inclusion generally within sport and physical activity, and there's a whole range of work that we've been developing in that space. So Tim Hollingsworth, our chief exec, has put out a couple of blogs around the work that we've been developing there, but just quickly I can outline some of the areas. One of the main bits has been about our new strategy development, so that our new strategy is due to come out early in the new year. So a big part of that will be, well, has been over the last part of this year, around what kind of work is going to be in that strategy around tackling inequalities and specifically around race inclusion. So a lot of work has gone into that, with a lot of external consultation with partners, and we've probably consulted on this more than we've ever done before. It's also going to be a 10-year long strategy for the first time, which is really exciting, particularly for work in this space, because it means we can really push on those longer term strategic investments rather than kind of short term changeover all the time. Mm-hmm. Another piece of the work that we focused on was our own internal diversity as an organisation and what we are trying to achieve around that. So there's lots of work coming in that space around recruitment and how that process works, training, education, kind of diversity at the leadership level. So lots of talk around those. There was also work that's been coming out of some joint work across all of the UK home sport councils. So that's like Sport England, UK Sport, Sport Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland.
Okay.
So there's two pieces of work mainly that's coming out of that. One is around kind of a much bigger insight piece around trying to collect as much information as we know that's out there at the moment. Mm. And the other one is a kind of a predominantly qualitative piece of work that's all about collecting lived experience from people across the sector, so we can really get a picture of what it's like, so we can build on that and kind of make a difference. So that's all been developed since March, April time, and will obviously continue, particularly linked with the new strategy. So as you said, it's not specifically about a month for us. There's a lot of work going on in this space that will continue for a long time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Are there like any challenges like you've faced in the past few months, or over your 2 years of being at Sport England, or just generally the sport and physical activity sector, on looking at the changes that you're trying to make?
I think the most difficult thing for us is that because I guess we are at the top of the umbrella in terms of how we try and make influence. A lot of the stuff that we try to do in this diversity inclusion space is genuinely about trying to drive social change. And that's the hardest thing, because I mean, in one way or another, we're trying to always push things forwards, and our strategy at the moment is very clear that we think everyone should be supported to and have access to sport and physical activity, and that means everyone. But then it becomes difficult sometimes where we're also an arm's length government body, so we have to be a little bit careful about how far we can go with some of our work and our statements and passions and things. So where some of our partners may sometimes be able to be a little bit more positively critical of some situations, we have to be a bit more careful with that. So one of the biggest frustrations I have is kind of how bold we can be in some spaces, and I know I make that clear internally at Sport England as well. But it's a bit of a challenge, especially on some of the more controversial areas. And it's difficult where we're really trying to push to make a difference, but things move so slowly a lot of the time, particularly where politics is involved. So that, I think, is a real challenge. And it's hard to overcome that, especially when you get big stuff getting in the way, or not getting in the way, but bigger challenges and things changing all the time at societal level, like with Brexit, like with coronavirus, like with Black Lives Matter. There's always these things kind of that come in from the side that just kind of change the parameters a bit. And because we're trying to work on a bigger scale, we have to factor all that in, and it just kind of changes the game all the time, to use a sporting term, I guess.
Yeah. So how do you keep yourself going? Like, how do you stay sane and keep pushing?
I mean, being totally honest, mental health is something that's quite close to me. And I don't stay sane all the time. It's I think it's important for people to talk about the lows as well as the highs. So I've had my own journey with depression and anxiety probably over the last 2 years or so, that started off kind of through personal reasons, but it's certainly been influenced by work and society and all those other things. So there's ways that I try and keep sane on a personal level. But I have great support at work and with friends, and we have a good climate at Sport England around talking about mental health and trying to support each other on that. But I guess in this space, the main point is that the motivation to get up in the morning is that we're genuinely helping people, and that's the point. In that we know that, especially with stuff like the Tackling Inequalities Fund, we are having an impact on people's lives. And one of the really good things we did straight away with our kind of everything that was current work when coronavirus first hit was to say that all KPIs were off the table. So it was everything was kind of super relaxed. We knew all timelines were going to go out the window. We stopped pushing a lot of those parameters around funding, and we said to everyone who was receiving funding from us that we knew we were going to need to be relaxed. If we needed to change the parameters around the funding, if we needed to change work programs, let's do that. And we knew that meant that people were staying employed, they were keeping jobs, people weren't having to go on furlough. We may be even generating new working spaces around this kind of movement online. So that kind of stuff was really rewarding, but also, as well as it kind of being the right thing to do, those are the things that I try and use as my anchor on the tough days, in that we are genuinely trying to help and support people.
Yeah. They say change is slow, right? It would eventually happen, but sometimes it takes time. Are there any, you did talk about the community of friends that you have and, your supportive organization, for people who may be struggling as well, to just keep the conversation going in different capacities. What is that one thing that you would say, they should think about, they should do? There is no one size fits all, but it's just, from your experience.
Yeah, the biggest thing for me was about kind of being honest with people about your situation and not being afraid to ask for help if you need it. So I was pretty lucky that I went to get medical support straight away. I went to my doctor. I was really honest and have been really kind of upfront about explaining my kind of journey with this stuff, just across like with friends or across my social channels or using our internal blog system at work, just so people are aware. And it's that funny balance of I have this thing where it's kind of like you want to reach out to ask people to ask how you are, which is a bit of a weird thing to be in. But I think especially for students who may be isolating now, who may feel quite lonely. I literally just read a book actually that has recently come out called I think it's called The Boy Beyond. I'm going to check that right now, but it's a story about a student who actually went to university in Bristol, I think. And it's about his journey with depression and kind of what that led to. And I think this is a really, The Boy Between, that's what it's called. It's a really important thing to bear in mind now around all this isolation that will be happening across the country for students, and going to uni is a tough place anyway. But yeah, just making sure that you are reaching out and asking for help where you need it. I mean, we know that there's so many online communities now, and I guess that can maybe be a bit overwhelming. But for maybe those students who have kind of specific demographics, so we know that there's a lot of support out there for LGBT plus people. We know that there will be more support out there more than ever now for Black students or other ethnic minorities. There are loads of systems online around mental health, like Mind have some really cool stuff, and a lot of this is all over the place. So I know that can be a bit overwhelming, but just starting with a bit of a Google search, or just being honest with friends and family, just kind of saying you're having a bit of a tough time at the moment, and where that can go.
I was saying to a friend yesterday, we were at church, and during the service, different individuals came out to give their testimonies of how things have changed for them for the better over the past few months. And just looking at all that happened during the service, I said to her, you know, when you see loads of people, everyone is smiling, everyone is cheerful, but you never really know what anyone is going through until they start speaking, and having those opening conversations, because sometimes you need someone to allow you to open up to say whatever it is, and it's not easy, because you want to know that the person is interested in actually, you know, hearing you, listening to you, supporting you down the line.
And it can be tough for people to share stuff. I've always been fairly bold and not really worrying about what other people think. So I'm quite.
I need to be like that.
But I know that's hard for some people. But for those other people who may be having conversations with people who they might have some concerns about, or they think something's not quite right, I tend to just recommend asking the question, how are you, like a few times, just to keep dropping it in. So maybe asking it up front, and then maybe asking again, and then
there was a campaign. I think there was a campaign at some point about I can't remember what it was called, but not just saying are you all right and then, you know, passing by, but actually checking to make sure that the person is actually okay. But I can't remember what it was called.
I mean, especially during this time, like making sure that people are getting outside and getting some fresh air, that people are eating properly, that people are speaking with other people. There's little things you can do to kind of get clues about people's welfare and how they're doing. As much as they might say, yeah, it's fine, if over a period of time, you know, they haven't left their halls for 2 weeks or something, like there's some flags there that there may be some other concerns.
Currently on one of our campuses we have over 2,000 students, and with lockdown we're thinking about all the different ways, you know, we have to be looking after them, you know, making sure that they're doing okay, making sure that, you know, every person is not stuck in for a couple of weeks without speaking to anyone. It is hard, honestly. Personally, I'm glad I've graduated and I don't have to experience this, because I don't know how I would cope if I was in a similar situation. So I do admire their courage to even come to university during this
Yeah.
uncertain time, like generally. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, one last question. For individuals who do not see themselves as part of the conversation around the equality and diversity area, how do we encourage them or let them know that it is not your role, Jamie, as senior equality and diversity manager, to drive all these changes forward, that you need their support and you need their involvement and engagement all the way through to get things rolling?
Yeah, I mean that's I mean it's not, as you say, it's not one person's responsibility. We're all responsible for the state of our society, of our planet, of
Mm-hmm.
our politics, of all of this stuff that has an influence. And this is one of the really good things I've seen come out of Black Lives Matter, particularly, is this movement away from being, oh, I'm not racist, to I am anti-racist. Like, this is about action and about doing something.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why these campaigns exist is because we have not done anything for so long. Because I've been talking a lot about this recently, and that I find work in this diversity inclusion space weird, because it's the wrong way around. Like, it's totally, these roles shouldn't exist, these jobs shouldn't exist.
Oh my, thank you, Jamie. Exactly. And
we're here to try and undo all of the societal stuff that's happened. So we're trying to unravel all this stuff to get to a place where we just treat people as people and respect everybody's opinion, no matter what they look like. It's bizarre.
Yeah, to be honest, my experience, I never knew I was Black until I moved to the UK 7 years ago. The sort of things that I think about now, many years ago when I lived back home in Nigeria, did not even come to mind at all. And I do wonder, now that I'm a part of this conversation a few years down the line, so after the 10-year strategy at Sport England, after other strategies that other organizations will be pushing forward, let's say in 20, 30 years, would we still have to do this event where people are having to talk about their racial trauma? Because we do know that, sometimes when people get to talk about these things, they have to relive it again, which is not the best place.
And this is, and we're seeing that now even with the trans community, in that for those that are linked into it, there was some consultation that started 2 years ago on the government's legislation around the process of transitioning genders. The outcomes of that were put off and delayed, and they finally came out and nothing changed. So another inquiry has just been released into that process, which means that even in a fairly short period of time, over a few years, people are having to do that again and really open up their raw selves to the government to explain all of this, which they've already done. But so we're seeing that kind of happen on a much quicker societal level than we are with discussions around ethnicity. But there are people who I work with now who have been having this conversation for 20, 30 years. And we don't want to be in that place where that's continuing to happen. But it all comes down to the fact that the white privileged minority run the world, right? That's the situation we're in, which has been a development ever since civilization first established, right? This is how long we're talking. We've seen it happen since the dawn of time, which all sounds a bit philosophical and a bit major, but that's where we are, and that's what we're trying to undo.
And that's why I asked you the question around, how do you keep going? Because I would think, even for myself, in my own space, it is exhausting, to be quite honest. It doesn't make any sense. And when you have individuals who do not understand, it's how do I make you see reason as to why you have no right to take my life? I have a right to exist. I have a right to be in a space because I'm human. the color of my skin or what I've decided to do with my gender should not change how you perceive me. I am still as human as you are.
And I find it so bizarre that we judge people so much to the point of, to the ultimate point of killing someone or putting someone in jail because of the color of their skin or what genitals they have and whether that links with their internal identity. I just find it so bizarre, and that we have these conversations about just how can we still be.
How?
Yeah, it's crazy. So I mean that was, I think, the biggest thing that Black Lives Matter achieved, in that it did more than we would ever be able to do by trying to run training and education around unconscious bias or around inclusion, in that because it was such a big moment in time, and I hope it continues to be an important movement. It was inescapable. People had to consider how they were affected by it, or how we got to that point, or how it affects their kids, or how it affects their friends or their day job, or people had to sit and think about it. And suddenly the penny seemed to drop, in that, right, we need to be more proactive here. This isn't about just saying we support Black people. Obviously, who's going to say they don't? I mean, there may be some, but the vast majority of people, I'm not going to dispute that. But this movement became much more about doing something as opposed to just saying something. And that is, I think, going back to your question, is the whole point about this, in that it is everyone's responsibility to do something, to challenge poor behavior, to support the voice of their Black colleagues, to do all that they can to try and just make this normality.
And I think that's why, obviously, social media has its negatives, but I think social media has brought this to the forefront, because, like you said, this has been happening for so many years. But right now, with most people starting their day with their gadgets and ending it with their gadgets, you cannot avoid seeing what's out there. But it would hurt me to think that it would take someone to lose their life or end up in prison or lose a family member for certain things to change. And that's why I do hope in a couple of years, who knows how long that's going to be, that things do change. Like you said, such roles, are not meant to exist. We're not meant to be having these conversations. But at this point, it is our reality, but it's an unacceptable one. Yeah,
totally. And we're all responsible for making a difference. It's like the same as this. I mean, this whole David Attenborough Extinction Netflix documentary blew up, didn't it? Because it just put the responsibility back on people, and that's what this is all about. Ultimately, we can't rely anymore on politicians to make sensible decisions, because everything moves too slowly and it doesn't happen quick enough. But the point about social media, I think, is really interesting, and how media generally makes it very difficult to have a sensible conversation in that diversity and inclusion space, and that everything is always polarized to try and drive conversation or sales of newspapers or whatever. And we've seen what happens in that social media space. And I think it's really interesting that we're seeing trends now of young people not having social media accounts and not using it, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all this stuff, because they don't want to be polluted by all this stuff. And I think that's, maybe the future is going back to not having this kind of a space, or I don't know. I'm really careful about what I use social media platforms for now, and how I read into stuff or share thoughts, or it's a really interesting kind of dangerous space, and why we're seeing these big bosses hauled up in front of inquiries and committees about what they're doing, because it's no longer about sharing photos of having a nice night out. There's so much more to it now that is dangerous.
Absolutely. I don't know if you heard about the NSAS protest in Nigeria a few days, 2 weeks ago.
I've been seeing bits about kind of what's been happening and wider across Africa generally.
It's terrible, but I did have to take a few days off social media just to keep my sanity, because when you see the images, the videos right in front of you, for myself, I felt helpless at the time because my family is back home. Although I have a brother and a sister in other parts of the world, but it felt ridiculous that there was daylight murder going on in Nigeria and, like you said, in other parts of Africa as well, and the so-called politicians. There's just no accountability. It's saddening. So yeah, I do.
I think that's so important that you've recognised that you needed to take some time away from it, or even from work and things like that. That I think there is more awareness now from employers and kind of colleagues, friends, family to recognise that this stuff has an impact. Seeing those images and videos of George Floyd had an impact on people, and I mean there was several kind of online stuff that was shared, but I know that Clara Amfo, the Radio 1 DJ's account of what happened and why she had to take some time off work to just deal with this stuff is really relevant, and people need to think about that, in that if you are feeling affected by it, there is nothing wrong with saying you need to take some time to work through this and kind of heal. And this is big stuff. It's not like, I mean, in some ways it is like you're watching a Netflix documentary because they're getting so real now, and but it's important to remember that this stuff is real life, and
I think that's what makes it hit different.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I'm watching a documentary and it's a clip of things that have happened in the past, it hurts, it gets me upset, but you know, with social media, you're seeing current images and videos, and that just changes the whole thing. So at the university, a couple of weeks ago, I had a conversation about how we get to include, you know, trauma, racial trauma or any sort of trauma as part of the personal circumstances that students can do to seek some time off or to seek an extension from whatever assessment that you're doing, because sometimes I don't know how to evidence that I'm experiencing trauma from what I've seen on social media. And I think it's important that, you know, it's something that the university gets to look into. But thank you so much, Jamie. I have absolutely loved having a conversation with you. Thank you.